So, my name is Ryan Collins, and I want to start by asking a question, and that is, what can we learn about mediating social difference today from an ancient Maya city? This is a big question, right? And we're going to return to it at the end. But how I want to start is just by breaking down and unpacking this question. So first, when I say social difference, I'm talking about the shared cultural beliefs that we all have that also enforce social distinctions on a society-based level. So these types of beliefs, they can be based upon religion, they can be based on politics, gender, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status, all of these grand scale sorts of things. But we can also see these differences occurring on the small scale. For example, when I was a kid, my sister and I would go with my dad on a pilgrimage to see our very favorite baseball team in Tampa, Florida. We were always going to see the New York Yankees, right? So when we got to Tampa and we were hanging out, it was always better for us, we felt more comfortable if we were hanging out with the Yankees fans. And the Tampa fans were also happy with that too, as far away as you could go. So what I'm trying to illustrate with this example is that if you're a fan of one team versus another, you can find yourself being marked in a social relationship in one way. And if baseball doesn't do it for you, then you're also finding a way to mark your own social identity in relationship to that. And this is generally how social differences work, by cohesive beliefs that pull one group together, but paradoxically separate another. So I'm an anthropologist who focuses on the social past. Now, a show of hands, how many of you in here know what anthropology is? That's a lot. This is impressive, and that's great. Now, don't feel embarrassed. How many of you don't know what anthropology is, or maybe need to brush up on it? Okay, awesome. I see a couple anthropologists who are not raising their hands. Shame on you. Now, anthropology can basically be summed up as a discipline that's focused on one research question, and that is, what brings societies, communities together, and what are the tensions that pull them apart? For anthropology, or for many aspiring anthropologists, you never hear about this topic until you get to college. When I first was picking my courses for college about 13 years ago, I wanted to be an English major, and I showed up to the registrar's office ready to sign up for my English courses, but I showed up a little late, and I got stuck with 2 courses with anthropology in the title. I reassured my parents for hours that this would fulfill a general education requirement. This is a sad thing because anthropology focuses on, again, what people come together. It's a holistic discipline of understanding people today, people in the past, and everywhere. It's all about bringing social interaction to the foreground, but we tend not to know about it until we're in a specific space. So, what I like to study with this question of what is it that brings people together are these rituals of social solidarity. Now, a ritual of social solidarity is just an event where people come together because of a specific theme, an idea, something that's abstract. It exists beyond that of an individual. It's something communal. Now, take a look around you today. You'll see many people sitting here gathered because of a theme. We're all participating in a collective ritual of social solidarity right now. So now that we know what these are, now that we're all familiar with all these jargony terms like anthropology, social difference, and rituals of social solidarity, we can start to move on to where is it that I'm looking in the ancient past to understand where such rituals take place. Well, we need to look at places around us today. So I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the Boston Commons, Central Park in New York, or the National Mall in Washington. These are places that we tend not to think much about. If you're going through, passing by on your daily commute, you might be thinking about where you're going. You might be having a lunch break and having existential thoughts about the day and anything else. But these are also the same arenas where we see collective engagement with communities for major events. And some of those large-scale rituals of social solidarity that we see today are the March for Science, the Women's March, the People's March for Climate. These are things that are happening around us that, again, bring communities together on an abstract notion that exists outside of yourself. I was fortunate enough to be at the March for Science in DC just last weekend. And as an archaeologist, I'm interested in the materials that people have that showcase what these events are all about. So if you take a look at some of these signs, some of my favorite ones that really demonstrate what these types of events are about, it says science for the common good. Again, that's an individual representing something about being together with a community that's much larger than themselves. I want to take us back in time because we're going to put on our anthropological hats right now. Now that we have these concepts defined and down, I want to ask, when do these rituals of social solidarity begin? And how did people come together in the past? So to do this, I'm going to take us to a site called Yaxuna, Yucatan, Mexico. This was a city beginning about 3,000 years ago. And at this city, you have major monumental groups, you have all of these crazy features of Maya society that really showcase how special this place was. But it didn't start off that way. In the beginning, we ended up finding, with my project, Proyecto Interregional Político de Centro de Yucatán, which is a mouthful, so we're just going to call it PIPSI. Now, we were interested in figuring out the earliest occupation of this city plaza, your town square, your Boston Commons. We wanted to see what people were doing in the beginnings of this place and how they're related to the development of society. And what we found was that the plaza, your communal space, existed before there were any residences, before there were any households, before there was agriculture. In fact, the community was that of a mobile horticulturalist foraging group, or perhaps several. So they're not living there, but they're coming together seasonally, annually, to put on events that talk about their community, that really put their community at the foreground. And the things that they're doing with the initial occupation is scattering personal adornments. Now these beads that you see here, they're not coming from one individual. They're coming from the jewelry of several individuals who helped partake in building this plaza for the first time. So that we know that this is a ritual that takes place for a community. It's not just one person who's getting to put things out there. It's everybody imbuing this space with a piece of themselves. We also see evidence of feasting and water catchment. With water catchment, we understand that the ancient Maya society found this to be a part of ritual significance. It offers up something to the rain god Chak. So having vessels like this for water catchment emphasize the importance of ritual belief and the people who are coming together first. Now we also have episodes where we see burning and isolated patches on a floor. Now that may not look like anything, because if I was finding this for the first time, and I did ask this, what is that? Why does it matter? Well, that actually lets us know that people were having feasting events. That's where you're cooking for large-scale groups in a very isolated moment. So it's kind of special. Now, over the next 600 years, this site undergoes dramatic change. We see that the center plaza, our town square, is still at the center of the action, but now it's being led to by roadways connecting it to our first major districts of this city. And these first major districts are starting off on equal footing. And because the plaza is at the center of these districts, at the center of Yaxuna, we know that community engagement was still at the foreground. That was still the most valuable thing. But there are many changes happening at Yaxuna at this point in time. Now we're starting to see vessels that are more for individuals. We're starting to see the incorporation of exotic, non-local trade wares like jade, obsidian, and marine shell from thousands of miles away. We're also seeing ceramics that are indicative of fermentation. So we know that there's agriculture. We're also seeing this practice of burying axes. Again, this may not seem like much to us, but if you think about it in the past, this is a means of marking your identity. When we see axes being buried in a public space like this, it relates not just to Maya centers, but to Olmec centers as well. This place has a truly metropolitan feel to it, and it's bringing in outsiders. We also see the political systems are shifting as well. So before, when Yaxuna had been an egalitarian society, things were more open and communal. But now we're seeing roadways like this, which are essentially stages or platforms for political events that are meant for individuals to walk on. So we now know that political systems are shifting to be more ingrained within one member of society, or at least a cohesive small group. So your social stratification is now becoming much more enforced and visible. Now, as I mentioned before, we're seeing the incorporation of new symbols and new forms and ways of life. With this cross, we're seeing a pull, as I said before, to Olmec, to other Maya centers. It's a symbol that marks Yaxchilan as a special center, as a major city within the Maya landscape. And what we also know is happening at this point in time is population is increasing in an unprecedented level. One of the rules we have to think about with cities in the ancient past is that they required outsiders to grow. When we think about cities today, we're lucky. We're very fortunate that we have modern technology, medicine, access to healthcare. In the past, mortality rates would have been much higher because access to those things was not available. So for a city to grow at an exponential rate, you needed to be pulling in communities from outside. So when we think about Yaxchilan, it's clear that there would have been anonymity in this city, that they would have had to understand social difference as a part of everyday life. And the way to mediate that, again, was through engagements in this communal space. Things wouldn't always be this way. It wasn't always hunky-dory, unfortunately. As time grew on, our previous central plaza, our gathering space for putting community, rituals of social solidarity on the foreground, they disappear. This space is abandoned. In fact, our early major districts, they start to become abandoned as well. And our only new growth happens at the north, where political powers are clearly being invested within a single family. In fact, now a dynastic ruler who has wealth that's greater than that of the rest of society, showcasing that there's a complete distinction from what was there in the past. This is no longer a truly egalitarian society. With the plaza, we see it does come to an end. For the Maya, they had this thing called a termination ritual. And what that means is that monumental places like a plaza, like a building, they all had souls. So to terminate it meant to ceremonially kill it, to end its space as a meaning of significance. So when this space is killed, it coincides with this rise of inequality, with a marked showcasing of difference as being somehow shelved. When I started off this talk today, I asked you the question, what can we learn about mediating social difference from an ancient Maya city? Well, we have to look at the data. We see that a city began because of community investment, because of community-wide participation, acts that required people to experience coming together, to visibly be there with one another. Over time, that comes to an end, because these community engagements are no longer part of your bodily experience. They're not part of your everyday. They're not part of your memory. When we think about the March for Science today, we think about the Women's March, we think about all of these other protest events. These are the rituals of social solidarity that we need to keep enforcing. We need to retain these as points of our own experience with one another, or else they'll fade from our memory. Thank you.